everybody, and welcome to Drive to Win. I'm Justin Bell, your host, sitting here inside the Wynn Las Vegas. And the show, of course, is also brought to you by Mobil1 for the love of driving. Love of driving, that's what it was, love of Formula One. That race last weekend in Azerbaijan at the Baku track was outrageous. In every way, I loved it. If it didn't compel you to get involved in Formula One, and as I said to a lot of friends this week, if you're not into it, watch that race, because I promise you that is as good as it could get. Before I get to that part, David Coulthard is joining us. DC, as he is known, he is actually on his way to the Red Bull ring as we speak, and he is going to be joining us to dissect the race. He wasn't on site this weekend, but certainly as one of the F1 main commentators, he would have been following it. So can't wait to have him on the show. Well, how do I sum it up quickly? Oscar Piastri, he came of age, didn't he? In a big way, he found his big boy shoes, and all that promise, all that talent, all those indicators, those markers that were showing us that he really was going to be one of the top Formula One drivers of our era really came to fruition. It was an extraordinary demonstration of pace. And I think if I was Lando Norris, I would be going, oh my goodness, my teammate may be just that little bit too hot, and certainly putting McLaren into an interesting predicament when it comes to papaya rules. Let's get into that when DC gets on the show. But of course, Charles Leclerc, he was picture perfect, inch perfect. I always think about him as being one of those immaculate human beings. He always looks good. He's tidy. He's not prone to outbursts of sort of outrage, but he kind of does his stuff in the car. This Baku circuit, 4 poles in a row, but he's never converted it to a win. And that is still the elusive for him, because he was right there. It was mano a mano. It was as good as Formula One could get, but in the end, he got the second spot. And when I say Sergio Perez was the Red Bull star of the weekend, what would you say about that? Isn't that, those are words I never thought I'd say, actually, on Drive to Win. If Red Bull gives you wings, then his are obviously clip-on ones, because he doesn't seem to have them too much of the time. But he outpaced his far more successful and hero status legendary teammate Max Verstappen. He just outqualified him. He outraced him. He outhandled the car. I mean, it was extraordinary. He was a hero right up until that moment that he wasn't, when he had a last minute, 3 laps to go, wreck with Carlos Sainz, who had that opportunistic overtake right there at the end. I mean, my heart bled. There's so much to that. It was equal in apportioning the blame. The FIA, the Formula One, they did not give either of them a penalty. It was a racing incident. But oh my gosh, woe is me, woe is them. It would have been so good for either of those two to have taken third spot on the podium. But for Sergio, he certainly deserved it. And as Christian Horner said, he drove out of his skin this weekend. And I guess once they reviewed the tape, they both agreed that they were equally at fault. But anyway, I want to unpack that a bit with DC. We had 2 rookies in the points, showing that the next generation talent is really worth the investment. But when it came to the race, like a great movie, there were so many story arcs. There was so much going on. When the cameras were like following all the different battles through the field, you're like, oh, what's going on here? That track certainly is very impressive. It looked like 8 cars wide at one point, and then 2 cars wide going to the 5th century fort pass. So it was very, very interesting to watch. I really enjoyed it. So as I say, we got DC coming in a minute. In the break, the last 2 weeks, since I had lovely Ruth Buscombe here, the biggest news, and really the only one I want to talk about, is Adrian Newey finally announcing his move to Aston Martin. Now, when they announced that, it was a massive step, because Adrian Newey, he really is, if he's the golden goose, that means he lays golden eggs, which in Red Bull terms, he really has. I mean, think about it. The cars he has been personally involved with have won 25 world titles, more than 200 Grand Prix. And he's joining Aston Martin as their managing technical partner right at the beginning of next year. But they did a very fancy launch, got everyone really involved, everyone excited about it. I think it was a little bit premature, as Christian Horner said. He's still under contract, but he understands. I don't think any other action will be taken on that. But just seeing the way Lawrence Stroll is able to put his money in such effective ways to growing this Aston Martin racing empire and the road car side. And apparently he closed the factory on a Sunday, told everyone who normally comes into work, don't bother coming in, because he wanted to give Adrian a personal tour, show him all the things, the wind tunnels, all their plans for the future. And I mean, it's easy when you're thinking it's $40 million a year. That would change anyone's mind, but it really did get his attention. So that's what they're going to do. I'm very excited to see. And of course, working with Fernando Alonso is one of Adrian's lifetime ambitions, apparently. So let's see what they can come up with. And of course, he's a co-owner, which is something he's always wanted to have a bit of skin in the game. Well, you're listening to this podcast, which probably means driving means a lot to you. Now, for me, it does every chance I can. Just the other day, I was at Circuit of the Americas driving the incredible $4 million McLaren Solus GT, revving all the way to 10,200, and I was going over 215 miles an hour on the back straight. And I tell you what, it focuses the mind. But no matter the venue for your kind of driving, it's always about the love of driving. And that is what Mobil1 is all about. It's a reminder that even when life starts to feel too full of screens and routines, the ultimate escape is waiting patiently in your driveway. Mobil1 for the love of driving. Visit loveofdriving.us/drive to win to learn more. Well, let's jump into the race. And there is no one better to do this with than David Coulthard. He's an MBE, by the way, member of the British Empire. That shows how esteemed he is in the UK. He's from Scotland. 15 seasons of Formula One between 1904 and 2008. He won 13 Grand Prix, 62 podiums, which is quite a finishing record. Runner-up in the 2001 championship, driving for McLaren. Now he has this really entertaining, and if you haven't watched it, you should, Formula for Success, FFS. I thought that meant something else. A host of FFS podcast with Eddie Jordan, and just taming these two, putting them either side of a microphone and hearing their stories has been really entertaining. So very excited to have DC on the show, a great friend as well. So DC, mate, I'm so happy you're able to join me.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to see you, even though it's virtually at the moment, but we'll be in the same room in a few weeks in Las Vegas.
I know, I'm excited. But you've been everywhere. Why do you come to the States so much? Is that all Red Bull stuff?
Yeah, it has been. Actually, I'm not that often in America, but it just so happens this year we had a running show car event in Washington, down Pennsylvania Avenue. I'd not been to Washington before, so I've got to tick that box. And then we were in Houston a week ago, and then I had a few days in New York because I didn't want to fly back for 4 days, and then we were in Minneapolis doing another show run. So It seems that the general appetite for Formula One is continuing to grow in America, which is obviously you've been based out there for a long, long time, but I think they've been so well served with their own domestic race series that Formula One never really had a foothold, but it's kind of gone crazy the last few years.
Yeah, you see, I mean, Minneapolis, some of the places you're going to, they are not where they've normally seen Formula One cars. So I think what you're doing is very cool because, I mean, it is the Drive to Survive influence, isn't it? Without it, no one would really care in a lot of America. But you notice it, right? You used to say, no wonder whether it was Schumacher or Hamilton or anyone, they could go to New York, walk down the street, and no one would know who they are. I don't think they can do that anymore, right?
No, I think you're right. And Lewis was in New York because I arrived just as the tennis final was on, so I saw that he was there. I didn't catch up with him, but look, no one should complain. This is a sport we all love, and what gets bigger at the top has an effect of bringing all the other championships up as well, I believe.
I know. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to everyone coming back to Vegas. So it's not like the unknowns have gone, right? Everybody knows coming in, and it was such a bloody good race last year that I think everybody's, really excited. And just so you know, it's all building up around us now. Taking the car in yesterday from the airport, just that whole paddock area in the last 3 weeks has just exploded. There's gantries and everything. So I think you can tell we're getting closer to F1 time. You're going to see a big difference. It's very cool.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you. I think the race was excellent last year. I really enjoyed that. Obviously it had its teething problems with the issue drain cover and the sessions running so late. So I believe it's all going to be a bit earlier this year, which I'm sure there's very good local reasons of which you'll have a better feel for why everything was running so late. But I think generally, if we use Singapore as an example, being that little bit earlier in the evening, it allows you to finish and then actually go out and do something in the city. The time I got finished at the track, it was so bloody late. I'm like, geez, I'm getting too old. I'm off to bed.
I mean, if Las Vegas beats you, you know you're getting old. And when you don't even have a chance to even give it a shot, that's the saddest part, right? Crazy. Well, talking about bloody good races, that was amazing, wasn't it? Sunday,
yeah.
I mean, Baku. It was, for me, sitting there on my sofa watching it, I'm going, this has got all the elements that Formula One for decades has had. Watching those two, patrolling each other just like that. When was the last time, DC, you saw two cars stick together for basically the whole race? We'd never see that.
Yeah, it's absolutely excellent, isn't it? It's good, close racing. The sport has been super close all year. If you look at from fastest car to slowest car, when I was in Formula One, which is obviously quite a while ago now, you could be like half a second quicker than the guy, on the second row or something. And now, if you're a second off the pace, you're last.
It's wild. So how good was Piastri's win then? I know you had Mark Webber on the show last week. And I actually went back to hear what he said about it this morning, about what he said about Oscar. We'll get into that in a minute. But I mean, Oscar's been showing all those markers of extraordinary talent, and it just came out, didn't it? All in one go.
Yeah. The thing that I really love about Oscar is his driving is absolutely brilliant, like top-notch overtake. He's really showing his qualities, F3 champion, F2 champion, into Formula One and Grand Prix winner. But he's so sort of quiet and humble out of the car. Obviously, we're not old enough to have met Bruce McLaren or Jim Clark, but he seems to be very much in the mold of how they, I've read the reports, where they were blindingly fast racers, fiercely determined in the car, but out of the car, you would be perfectly happy if they were dating your daughter.
So totally unlike us then.
Totally, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know which mold you and I came from, but yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. He seems respectful. He's crossing the line, or when his feedback on the radio, whatever they tell him on the radio. I mean, is he really as cool as that? I mean, it's an extraordinary skill to have.
Yeah, and it's going to stand him in such good stead. Because if you look at the different personalities, Lewis has found himself absolutely in the last decade, but the first part of his career, there was, he was growing into who he was and the success and what his passions were away from Grand Prix racing. If you look at Max, he's come in with quite a feisty personality. You know him, and out of the car, he's very approachable, very, easy to get along with. But obviously in the car and around the sort of media side of things, he can be quite short in his answers and abrupt. And then you've got, Lando with his heart on his sleeve, and if he's feeling blue, he'll tell us that, and if he's feeling happy, he'll tell us. And then you've got Oscar, who just seems to be, whatever his heart rate is, I'm sure it doesn't vary very much from when he's excited. And I just love these different personalities because it's quite easy to come into the sport, have all that attention, have the money and the adulation, and get kind of soaked up into this modern influencer type world that is obviously, a very big business, and then start to not be fully focused on the driving. I've got no fear that Oscar will, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, of course, he'll have grown into his life, but I don't think for one moment we're suddenly going to go, well, he's changed. I think he's going to remain consistent as a person.
And he couldn't have a manager that is more relatable for him, right? With Mark Webber. I mean,
it's brilliant.
Mark is obviously, I mean, I just was looking at his face. He did look like the proud dad, though, didn't he? He was like just beaming with sort of happiness and pride. It was really good to see. So breakdown overtaking, that overtaking maneuver he made. I was even talking with Jeremiah, my producer, about it last night, because I was trying to put into context when you've got a straight you're approaching, which looks about 8 cars wide, 6 cars wide, into that sharp left-hander with no runoff on the exit. And even Andrea Stella went, oh, he's going to go long when he went there. But the psychology, DC, of overtaking, when you come up behind someone, especially in Formula One, when you're braking at the absolute level of threshold of grip, to be able to pull off a move like that, make it stick, unflinching, I mean, that's the stuff you dream of doing, isn't it, as a driver? And it's almost indefensible as the guy in front. When he did that, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally concur that there was an element of me thinking, this is either going to be a lock-up and down the escape road, or if it's all happening a bit too late, then there's always a risk that Charles starts to turn in and then you end up brushing wheels. But he just timed it perfectly. He clearly understood his grip, understood the closing speed. And as you can relate, sometimes you're just in a sort of steady state slipstream. And other times you've got that massive overspeed that comes with DRS. And you've got to have the confidence and commitment. It's a one-way ticket. And he made it absolutely beautifully. And, I can't say he's going to get that sort of perfection every time, because again, as you've just said, you're on the edge of adhesion and you can't possibly know what the competitor is going to do as a reaction. But it just summed up what was a brilliant drive. And he won the race, a race that Charles arguably, on reflection, was a bit, a little bit soft. And, he could have maybe anticipated that or defended it a little harder. Well, actually, I don't think that particular pass he could have defended harder. They would have had contact, but maybe he could have not given him the invitation.
But I think it was a bit like inviting your dysfunctional cousin to a wedding. You hope they weren't going to accept the invitation. You know what I mean? I think it was like an invitation, but he didn't think anyone was going to take him up on it, right? I mean, at that point, coming from that far back, I was like, holy cow. But I remember, we've all done it in racing. I remember my dad used to say to me, he said, how do you go from 10th to 2nd? And then you sit behind the guy. Why didn't you just go by him? I'm like, well, it wasn't that easy. I mean, I caught all the way up. Do you remember that feeling? You know that feeling so well when you've made great progress and then overtaking the last guy becomes so hard. And there have been magnificent overtakers in history. All the way back to John Watson was an amazing overtaker in Formula One. But the way Piastri dispatched Lando at the last race, which obviously caused all those other issues. I mean, he's one of those guys that he just evaluates in the moment and is very opportunistic, which is going to work both ways, isn't it? As you say, once in a while, there will be a clash.
Yeah, of course, as a human being, he will make mistakes on occasion, but the nature of our business, nobody wins all the time. Nobody gets it right all the time. Obviously, if you were a boxer, that would be a horrible statistic. But if you take the more successful drivers, if you take Lewis, who's won over 100 Grand Prix, he's entered, high 300s, or is he into, I don't know, is he not 400 Grand Prix? Yeah. But so he's still, his strike rate is still below 50%. So you're never going to get it right all the time. But with the sort of speed he has and that instinctive racing reaction is what has absolutely established him as a future world champion, assuming the car continues to deliver throughout his race career. There's other drivers who, Checo, for instance, who is quick, has won Grand Prix, but I wouldn't say you sit back waiting for the big overtake or the big lap. He just is a very good driver, but this isn't about finding very good, is it? At the highest level, it's about finding exceptional, and the exceptional guys are the ones who win multiple races, multiple championships, and pull off those big passes.
Yeah, you quoted Mark when you were on the show, on your show last week. You said about, what did he say? Formula One isn't a finishing school. You've got to come prepared to perform. I think you were talking about Logan Sargent at the time. But these young drivers, they have so much preparation coming in. I want to get into the rookies in a minute. But it made me realize when I was watching Charles and that wonderful shot as they're, sideways off that last corner together in sort of tandem. And are we at that moment, because we're at the end of that regulation run, DC, or is it all going to come on upside down into 26? Are we going to lose this close racing?
Arguably, that will be the case. And historically, whenever there's been a big regulation change, then it shakes up the running order and somebody emerges that maybe wasn't, was being successful or wasn't being successful and vice versa when you have a regulation change. So it is a shame in many ways when you've got such sort of stability that we are going to see that change in 2026. And there's some question marks. If I listen to the engineers, the guys that understand how to interpret the regulations, there's some real concerns over the new engine rules, the increase in electrical energy as an overall energy source. We could find ourselves where you reach Vmax, let's say in the middle of the straight, and you then start slowing down all the way to the braking zone because you're going from having a lot of electrical energy, 50% of it coming from that, and then suddenly the internal combustion engine just can't keep up with the amount of drag and everything. So in anything that I've raced, and I'm sure it's the same for you, your Vmax is at the end of the longest straight just before braking.
Yeah. Well, let's not dwell on that. That's not exactly exciting stuff, is it? Let's go back. You mentioned Sergio Perez. I said in my open, he's like he has clip-on wings because he certainly clipped them on for this one. He's obviously extraordinary on this track, and it was just a great drive by him, wasn't it? I mean, great in practice, great in qualifying, out-qualified Max. And the way he drove the race was fantastic, which one swallow doesn't maketh a summer, or someone said that. I don't know. I hope it was a quote. But you know what I'm trying to say. It was an amazing result, exactly what he needed to do. But watching him, I mean, you're so involved in the Red Bull organization. I mean, he's won races. He's a bloody quick driver. Just to be behind the wheel of a Formula One car means you are that good. And he hasn't done himself a great service over the last few years relative to Verstappen. But it was looking so good for him.
Yeah, it was the drive that he has been able to deliver at various points in his career. The run up to that weekend has been underwhelming. He hasn't performed at a level that he can be happy with, and certainly doesn't reflect well in terms of point scoring relative to Max. And those are just the facts. This isn't an opinion-based championship. It's a points-based championship, and the stopwatch doesn't lie. So if he continues to deliver those sorts of performances, then he's back. And to beat Max is never going to be easy. I wouldn't expect that he even imagines he's going to do that every weekend. But he needs to be within that 2 or 3/10th window. Obviously, in Baku, he was quicker. You can't argue against that. But if he can be within that sort of 1-2/10ths, then he serves himself well, he serves the team well, and he will secure a longer-term future in Formula One. But if he goes back to how the previous races have been, he can't be happy with that. And certainly it falls short of some of the great victories that he's had in Formula One.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to his little conflict with Sainz in a minute, but I did want to bring up when they're watching, it's very hard for everyone at home when we're watching and we're listening to you guys talk about the tires coming into that operating window, unless you've driven a racing car and you've never felt that. I think it's probably the hardest thing for you guys as commentators to put across to the layman sitting at home, because isn't a tire just a tire? I know what you're talking about, but it's so difficult. That Piastri's outlet was 3 seconds faster than Leclerc's. Unbelievable on those tires. Ferrari are managing to try and get their cars into that tire window, and you talked about that. They talked about it a lot over the weekend. Can you give us a bit of insight? Why is that so difficult? What are they talking about trying to get, especially with Ferrari, the tires into not pushing too hard too early, but you give up a lot of track time. How hard is that for those guys?
Yeah, and I think it's even more difficult than it was for my generation. The sort of peak of new tire performance was very sort of predictable through the various formulas. If you had, maybe in the lower formulas outside Formula One, arguably sometimes the compounds were too hard and it was quite difficult to sort of get a big step forward in new tire performance. You just got a general uplift in your overall pace, or reduction in your overall pace is the correct way to describe it. But from what I understand, and I've only driven the Pirellis as running show tire tires, including RB19 last, excuse me, at Silverstone. So I just simply don't have the experience that the current drivers do. But it's this thermal degradation and the surface temperature, which seems so difficult to manage, where if they spin up the tire and the actual surface temperature goes up, then they struggle for grip for the next few corners. And we could spin up the tire, and yes, the surface temperature got a bit warm, but it wasn't the sort of drop-off or the sensitivity that they experienced today. So there's so much driver tire management during the early phases. And then if you're hitting a big lap on the outlap, you run the risk of just the tires running away from you and you never bring them back. So that's a judgment call that they have to make based on where they are in the race. But it is really a black art, the tires. And it's actually, I've said this, but it's not going to happen. And no disrespect to Pirelli, but I actually think that having competitor tires in Formula One is a good thing, because if, let's say, for argument's sake, you've got Michelin and Pirelli, some races the Michelin will be better and it will bring up the Michelin runners relative to the running order, and some races the Pirelli will be better, and therefore you don't have this sort of season of predictability of when a car finds form. You kind of expect them to be running in that sort of order during the majority of the season. But it is what it is. Some are better at managing the tyres than others. Irrespective of tyre management, the best drivers always tend to find the best way to manage them.
Yeah. I always like at the beginning, when the conditions are bad, the track's damp, it's cold, it's hot, whatever, they're slipping around. Isn't it funny? There's always a couple of drivers, normally the ones that come from countries where they grow up sideways in their strollers. Those guys, I mean, like Bottas and guys, and Raikkonen in his day, and those, whether it was Mika, Kimi, they're always freaking fast, aren't they? In those slippery conditions. I just because I think they fall out of their stroller onto a three-wheeler sideways, and that's before all the technology in the cars come into play. It's just interesting to see some guys are really good when the conditions get slick.
Absolutely, and again, with your sort of more intimate knowledge of America, the guys that come up racing on dirt and then go to ovals are comfortable leaning on that rear tire. I know I would be incredibly uncomfortable and completely out of my depth if I tried to drive an oval, because I simply don't like leaning on the rear tire. I like being in the middle of the car and feeling that I'm exploiting the grip of all the corners. So when I was at my best, it was when I was at one with the car. Whenever the car was pointy and a bit nervous at the rear, no way I could exploit as much of the car's potential as a Mika or a Kimi. Where I could match them was the days where I felt I got the car set to my liking. But their bandwidth for dealing with a nervous rear or a sideways car, and of course you're not going to see drifting style in Formula One the way that you would in other formulas, rallying and drifting and all the rest of it. They just don't operate like that. But somehow they're just comfortable being on that edge rear adhesion.
I mean, I think we're seeing more sideways than we have for a while, though, right? When they come off those curbs, I mean, it's nice to see as the tire deg comes in, it's a direct correlation. And, we both know what it feels like. You go, oh, crap, I'm sideways. That wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. But it's just great to see, because I think we went through a few years where we never even saw them have opposite lock almost. They had so much grip. But I love it. I mean, really just a lot of fun to watch. But you you say you drove the RB19. Just as a sidebar, when you get in that car, percentage-wise, where did the last race, when you competitively got out of a Formula One car to now, even though you're not on race tires and you're not supposed to be going super quick, how can you even put the modern day car into perspective to the one that you last raced?
Well, the truth is, I couldn't.
Really?
I think that for different drivers, their sort of point at which they lose the need. Martin Brundle very often used that expression and said in the early stages of retirement, it's not that you've lost the speed, it's that you've lost the need to be hanging all out there. I lost that need in 2008. So I can jump in the car, I can understand, of course, how to drive a Grand Prix car. Yes, that's a different era of car, but the architecture of the cockpit and the steering wheel and all that sort of thing is very Red Bull as I remember it. You can, and again, you'll relate to this, and any of the listeners who have driven on a track, you can at lower speed feel the front tire, feel where the limit of the tire grip is. At high speed, you can't go out and exploit it. I drove at Silverstone. There's no way I get anywhere close to the potential in the high speed, because the downside of finding out I've reached the limit could be a tank slapper on the crash. And for what I was doing, which was a filming, why would I want to put myself and the team in that position? I drove the car pre-Singapore last year, which is incidentally the only race the team Red Bull didn't win. It was Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. But, you're in season in an actual race car, then that's not a time to go experimenting.
Not the time. You got credit with Red Bull. You don't have that much credit with Red Bull.
Yeah.
Way to burn it up. There was some great moments in the great moment in the race. Obviously, we had all that papaya rules, malarkey that everyone was trying to work out what they mean by that. And we were obviously, when Lando qualified so badly, Oscar at the front took all that out of play. But it was an interesting moment, and I thought very subtly done when Lando held Perez just for that couple of laps, just perfectly through, especially those tight corners, which gave Piastri the opportunity to come out of the pits, which did change the outcome of the race. Obviously, it's not that easy to do, though, is it? To hold someone up without compromising yourself.
No, it's not, especially on, let's say, a regular track, but having the advantage of some corners where you just know no one's going to have a go overtaking you, then you can control it a lot more. I remember actually in my time of racing, Jacques Villeneuve holding up the field in Suzuka, just like going really slow through the middle of the chicane and places like that. He obviously had to bolt when he left the corners to not leave himself vulnerable. I forget the reason, what he was trying to do. It was obviously to do with World Championship, but who he was trying to screw up so he could gain the advantage. But perfectly done by Lando. McLaren have really been impressive in the way they've developed the car. They've got two great drivers. I think that they now are thinking like world champions. I think earlier in the year, they were still thinking a little bit like lottery winners, in as much that, wow, this is actually going much better. We're ahead of our planned sort of trajectory of when we get the team back to being world championship contenders. They've arrived there maybe a bit earlier than they were expecting after some lean times, but they are the real deal now. And that's when things become more difficult, because if you've got two quick drivers, they're both going to be arguing over victories. And then the team papaya, this whole sort of family unit, we race as one, becomes more difficult to manage, because the natural instinct of the race driver is healthy dose of, or an unhealthy dose of selfishness is probably the way to describe it, because your success is your teammate's failure and their success is your failure, even if it's an overall success for the team.
Yeah. And of course, you wouldn't want a driver. You wouldn't want either of them to not want to dominate the other. That's you want drivers that come out the womb killers, don't you? You've got to have that.
Yeah.
And that's what they've got. Now you've had some very brilliant teammates. You were also their brilliant teammates. And I did Vauxhall Lotus with Mika Hakkinen, and even in Vauxhall Lotus, I could see how good he was. Describe that, picking up on that theme. You have two drivers, totally different human beings. As we know, Lando more emotional, Oscar seems to be able to control it more. But inside the team, the one person you care about and know all about in terms of what they're doing behind the wheel when you look at their data is your teammate. It's like his heartbeat. It's like a cardiogram, right? You can see every element. Every time he flexes his ankle, you can see it on the trace. What do you think Lando is thinking right now as he evaluates and looks at Oscar?
I'd be really curious, actually, and I haven't asked Mark out of respect for, I don't want to ever put friends and colleagues in a position where you're asking them a question that they shouldn't give you the answer because of confidentiality. I'm quite, I think, disciplined in that, not putting people in difficult positions where they, you know, especially when you're buddies, to go, look, mate, I can't tell you. If you should know that they can't tell you before you ask that question. So here's what I believe, like you've just described. Lando will know exactly where the threat is from Oscar in terms of where are his strengths, what are the type of corners that just fit him very well. So by way of example, Mika was very strong in medium speed corners. I was quite late to become a left foot braker because when I started in Formula One, there were still foot clutches. And by the time I transitioned to left foot braking, because I realized that although I had an advantage in big stops, because going from coming off the throttle to hitting the brake, there was a natural delay in the time I could get my foot onto the brake. And therefore, I always was very much on the limit of, you know, overshooting in the big stops. And as you know, there's a lot of lap time in big stops. So I was good in those, you know, down into sort of hairpin type corners. But in the transition medium speed Suzuka, where you're sort of having to go throttle brake, left foot braking allows you to blend, and obviously your transition and the whole stability of the car is better. So that was an area where I could know before going to a racetrack where Mika would be strong, and vice versa. And he would be trying to understand how he could improve his big stops, and I'd be trying to understand how I improve my medium speed. And then the high speed was just as you know, you build your confidence and you keep your foot nailed and hope for the best.
Yeah, the way you're describing it, I'm visualizing, and when you sit on the trace, especially if you were right foot braking, you must have been looking at it going, I can't do that. I can't do what Mika's doing, carrying that speed and balancing the front through those corners.
I did, yeah, you're absolutely right. So what I did with my engineer, whilst I was committed to still right foot braking, was put a damper on the throttle, which didn't allow the throttle to close as quickly as it normally would. So, because what you would see with Mika is he would never completely close the throttle in a medium speed corner because there was a blend and overlap. Now, the downside of that meant he tended to use more fuel than I did because I would be completely off and then back on the throttle. So that gave me a small advantage on, Monza and places like that. But on the circuits where I was trying to not have a definite close and a definite back on, I had a damper that slowed down the release of the throttle. So I'd be on the brake and there would still be a bit of throttle application, if you like. And then I'd be back on the throttle. You understand what I'm trying to explain? Maybe not that eloquently. I was trying to replicate it without actually being a left foot braker. And then I committed to left foot braking probably, I can't remember if it was maybe 98, 99. And then I was fine. But when you're trying to become a left foot braker, when you've only been a right foot braker, it's actually really difficult to get the sensitivity that's necessary.
Well, and that's what we're saying. There's going to be little bits that they're both looking at each other because it's something that people, again, if you haven't been involved in racing, you can see someone's half a second, 0.3 faster than you. It's never in one place. It's not like it just happens. I mean, sometimes it's a hairpin or whatever. It's always in little bits. Well, let's talk about that almost brilliant moment. Sainz, who'd been stalking, he was coming up from behind. It was funny. I was listening to the broadcast. I was thinking, if DC was on the show this week, he would have been making more of Sainz approaching from behind because they didn't actually catch that until he was right on their rear. And I was thinking, he's in clean air. He's using his tires wisely. He's right there. And we know the Ferrari's quick. He makes that pass, good pass, but goes wide, coming, just carried that extra speed. And then it's that little drag race up that chute. and he just dressed a little, and they touch and they go in the wall. And I don't know about you, but my girlfriend was actually having a lion, and I was screaming at the TV, and she thought I killed the cat, but it was like, or worse. And I thought to myself, God, I have to keep watching that. I don't think anyone was to blame. And of course, as it broke it down, one thing, you described, run through what that little incident, which turned into a big accident, was. And also, I want to talk about visibility, because you can't see anything out the side of those Formula One cars, can you?
No, the visibility is restricted, but I totally agree with you that the initial sort of, when you're analyzing it, you're looking for the nuances, the micro movements that can make the difference between, rubbing wheels and having some distance. And there's no question that Carlos is moving slightly to the left, but that is completely consistent with how you would drive that straight. You're not going to run down the walls. You don't do it in an oval. You come down from the wall, and you wouldn't do it as a matter of course in a Grand Prix car. So Checo should have been aware of that, and Checo had better visibility of where his competitor was than Carlos did. So you absolutely can put it down as a racing incident, but I do think that the two of them were just clumsy in that moment. And in the heat of the moment, where a pass is going off and there's a lot happening and you've got fairly restricted visibility side on, there's lots of mitigating circumstances that make it a racing incident. But I would personally, and not trying to be clever after the event, I personally think I would have been giving, if I was Checo, more space to Carlos, because it's not like you were running out of racetrack on the left side. Yes, we both know you don't want to really go too far to the left because it's dirty and dusty, and if it's going to be a braking challenge down at the next corner, then you want to be in good shape. But there was enough of his front wheel alongside Carlos that, depending on how they would deploy their energy, and I'm assuming they would both be dumping everything they possibly could, then there was a reasonable, if not more than reasonable, chance that Checo was going to have the inside line at the next corner.
Yeah.
So with reflection, I think that he could have opened the steering slightly to the left, given a bit more room for Carlos. I don't think Carlos was sort of sweeping across the front of him or anything crazy there, but it's been very costly for them both in terms of points. It's been very costly for both their teams in terms of damage, and that comes out of your cost cap. And it's just a clumsy one, isn't it? It's one of those where you'd replay it and beat yourself up by going, why did I not give more space? So with that said, I think that the biggest loser, and therefore the person that probably needs to reflect on it most, is Checo, because Carlos didn't sort of use his vehicle as a weapon. And as the car behind, even with the halo and everything, you've still got more visibility of 3/4 of a car in front of you.
Yeah. And you could see when the two different reactions to them on the radio, Perez is like, what the heck is the guy doing? And you could, Sainz was like, what just happened? I mean, literally, I have no clue what happened. So, I think it was definitely not a reactive move for him. Moving on, we talked about the strength of Lando and Oscar and things, but when you've been the dominant force for so long and you start to believe you can walk on water, and then you can win races when you have everything stacked against you, you still win races, and now you're not, and you're Max Verstappen, just a little bit of psychotherapy on him. Where's his brain right now?
Yeah, there's no question that this is the difficult challenge for him. Building up to being a world champion was all the logical steps and progress, and the team, being the closest challenger to Mercedes, and then, the forever controversial first world championship, which if you're a Max fan, you go, that's racing. If you're a Lewis fan, then nobody's ever going to, be able to convince you that it's racing and what happened there. So, this now, after such a dominant year last year, is a readjustment for Max, because he was just a winning machine, and nobody likes not winning. And then there's obviously been some internal turmoil with the team, and his dad as well, who's a huge influence, has has clearly, had a relationship breakdown with Christian, and all of that just adds to distractions and pressure. So I think what we're probably seeing now is the reality of the situation has as well. That pill has well and truly been swallowed, and the only way out is to work. It's just like your competitors, just like McLaren have worked to bring themselves up, just like Mercedes have come back in the last 2 seasons from difficult starts to bring themselves into being more competitive. There's no other substitute for all hands on deck, digesting that performance pill and working logically back to where you are. So yeah, he won't be happy, but boo-hoo any driver that's not got himself a winning car.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a bit simplistic, wouldn't it? To say, well, look, everything started to circle the drain when Adrian Newey announced he was leaving and he got sort of put on gardening leave. And I'm sure there's a knock-on effect, and as you say, the Horner scandal and all these things wrapping into it. So I'm sure they'll regain their footing. But what are your personal feelings about Adrian going to Aston Martin? I know on the inside, you guys knew that was happening probably a lot earlier than we did. Lawrence Stroll must be he is lining up a killer team there, isn't he? And he must have sold the big picture, the blue sky, in an incredible way to get Adrian to come across. It wasn't just the dollar.
Yeah, look, Lawrence is an impressive individual. There's no question. I've had the chance to spend some social time with him in the past as well, and he's a great host. But there's a great commitment and passion for what he's doing and what he's trying to build and achieve. He's not like many people that are super successful. He's not going to be everyone's cup of tea in the same way Ron Dennis wasn't. But this isn't a sort of show friends competition. Again, it's a stopwatch competition. So you need to put in place the right facilities, the right people, deliver that in a car on the track to the right driver, and then you go and win races. And Adrian is a part of that jigsaw. He's incredibly successful history in the sport. I've been lucky enough to work with him at Williams, McLaren and Red Bull, so I've been the beneficiary of his leadership there. And he's one part of the ingredients you need to have success. We should remember that he didn't work at Mercedes during their dominant time. He wasn't at Ferrari when Schumacher was winning. So there's other very good people in the paddock. But in terms of being a sort of talisman and a catalyst, and someone with just so much experience, then there's no question that it will have an influence on the team. So I wish Adrian, obviously, all the best with that. There was an element of me kind of hoping that he would just really savor the success he's had in his early 60s and go and enjoy his boat and enjoy his time maybe in a slightly less stressful environment than Grand Prix racing. But an angry Adrian is him setting his pencil on the desk. I've never seen him launch anything across at a wall or scream and shout. So he's obviously, as an individual, able to compartmentalize his highs and lows, and the passion and drive and the opportunity is sufficient for him to want to keep this journey going. Because there's no question, and I'm certainly aware of it at 53, I'm much more aware of my own mortality and how much time, usable time, I'm going to have left on this planet. And with someone who, I've got a 15-year-old son, I have a younger partner, so there's a lot more of me trying to weigh up my work-life balance to make sure I'm living the best version of what that is, rather than just constantly, hitting it and wanting to deliver business success in the way that maybe I did when I was a little bit younger. So we've clearly seen where Adrian's mind is, and he wants to keep hitting it.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm totally with you. I'm in this much more content phase of my life, even though I work super hard. Losing our dear old friend Gilles de Ferran, he puts all this into context that you've got to enjoy it more. But that $40 million price tag will probably, for $40 million, DC, I would delay my self-gratification. Just by a tad.
I hear you, and I would as well. One thing though, I was going to say one thing I'm not able to delay is I have a rendezvous with some guests at 7:30 European time, and as I very rudely joined your podcast late, that's going to put us under time restrictions because I'm seeing 2 minutes until my expected delivery downstairs.
Well, David Coulthard, we're going to do the Mobil1 Pit Stop right now for the love of driving. Just quick little answers. To go fast on a street circuit, it is a mix of brains and balls. Which would you rather rely on?
Well, I was good on street circuits. I won Macau and I won Monaco a couple of times. And I maintain it's about driving 99%. It's not about driving 100%. I think Senna probably did that when he was on pole by over a second. But I was able to get pole. I was able to win on street circuits by driving 99. So that would mean brains rather than balls.
I know we've already talked about that you wouldn't physically, mentally do it. But which race in the calendar, if they were like, oh God, DC, you still fit into the race suit, give it a shot. Which race on the calendar, just for fun, would you wish you could try again?
Monaco.
That's the right way. You don't even have to put clean underwear on. You can roll out of bed.
Yeah.
You're in Las Vegas placing a bet. Who will win more races before the end of the season, Oscar or Lando?
God, that's a brilliant one. That is a brilliant question. Based on the fact that Lando is closer to Max in the championship and Oscar, prior to Baku, said he will be supportive, then I'm going to say Lando.
Out of the current Formula One grid, who do you wish you had raced against?
I guess Max, because I did race against Lewis. I did race against Fernando. Max is a sort of, he's a mix of Schumacher, Hamilton, Senna, Prost. He's such a mix of different people that he's moved the dial forward, hasn't he? And I think that it would just be really interesting to have experience going wheel to wheel with him.
Final question. Do current Formula One drivers really have as much fun as your generation, my generation did? No. And who has the most fun?
I think that Max, Lando, I think they probably have a bit more fun than the other guys, just based on sort of observation rather than having been out on the Randan with them.
Of course.
But I guess it's all depends what you call fun. You travel a lot and you'll see people standing at airports plane spotting. They consider that fun. There's no amount of, well, there is an amount of money that would make me do it, but I was going to say, for exaggeration, there's no amount of money would have me stand watching aircraft land.
Well, David, thanks for doing the Mobil1 Pit Stop for the love of driving. As you go out the door, predictions for this weekend?
I think because it's a street race again, we'll see a sort of continuation of what Baku delivered us. So it might be a little bit challenging for Red Bull, but we've very clearly seen that Ferrari were working on the bumpy circuit. It's a little bit more open in Singapore, so I think the battle for pole could be between Ferrari and McLaren, and then it'll be has anyone brought upgrades that mean that Red Bull and Mercedes are in front of each other?
All right, mate, listen, I know you got to go for dinner. Do what you do. Sing for your supper. Thanks so much, man. Let's stay in touch, and I'll see you in person when we get to Vegas.
Yeah, see you in Vegas. Sorry, I'm cutting it short, but as you say, singing for one's supper is what I do nowadays. So catch you in Vegas.
Well, guys, the Las Vegas Concours is back for 2024. One of the world's most prestigious automotive events takes place November 1st through the 3rd at the Wynn Golf Club right here at the Wynn Las Vegas. It really is a one-of-a-kind immersive experience, and the Las Vegas Concours is an exhibition featuring more than 250 distinctive automobiles from around the world. It pays homage to the remarkable cars of the past, the present, and some very cool ones from the future. A celebration of heritage, craftsmanship, and innovation. The Las Vegas Concours at Wynn Las Vegas brings car enthusiasts from all corners of the globe to revel in automotive excellence. all set against the dynamic backdrop of the Las Vegas Strip. And who will you find emceeing and hosting the event, on stage, doling out the heavy hardware to this year's winners? Well, me, of course. So make sure to come and say hello this November. For more information regarding recently added rooms and packages, you can visit lasvegasconcours.com. That's lasvegasconcours.com. You know what? It's one of my favorite things, catching up with guys that I've literally known for 30 years. So we've had different trajectories in our career, and I didn't win a Grand Prix, didn't even compete in one, but we had a lot of common ground, and that's one of the most beautiful things when you have been in this sport at whatever capacity. You have relationships that go forever, and definitely Gilles de Ferran was one of our common denominators. And DC, he still fits in that Red Bull race suit rather snugly. Oh no, perfectly, not snugly. So he gets those chances. If you follow his social media and listen to his podcast, Formula for Success, it's really fun and insightful. Well, you heard it, him giving the predictions for this weekend in Singapore. Remember, Singapore was that first race that was ever under the lights. And I just remember watching, captivated by the colors of the cars, the helmets, the intensity. It's like my TV had just gone high def, and racing had gone four-dimensional. I loved watching it, and we're obviously a little bit more used to it now, and we see it back here in Las Vegas. I think my predictions for the race are a little bit the same as DC's. I think you're going to see McLaren doing what they do, unleashing both drivers, but the team dynamics can only start to tense up. Those papaya rules will be in place. I just think Lando has to be assertive this weekend and not have a bad weekend, because something I was thinking about, actually. Do you remember a few weeks ago when they were talking about statistical and the probability of going for the Drivers' Championship for Lando against Max, and the 60-something points apart? And they were like, well, if Lando would have to win and Max, which seems impossible, would have to be like 5th or 6th or 7th. That'll never happen. But that's what has to happen in order for him to achieve the points delta. Well, guess what? The last two races, that's exactly what Max has been, back down in that place. And if Lando had won both races, it would have been going according to plan. So never say that those statistical opportunities are impossible if everything goes your way. Ferraris are so fast. I think Carlos will come off a lot of expense and time getting his car ready. I really would like to see him on a podium. I just want to see him finish off his year with Ferrari winning as many races as he can and being on the podium as much as he can. No offense to Charles Leclerc, but I think it just is going to be so good for him to do that, because I don't know what his next year is going to be like when he goes over to Williams. Remember, this track, it's very long. It's very bumpy. They've been racing there since 2008. It's incredibly humid. So that's one of the reasons they run it at night, also for the TV distribution, but it's very demanding on those drivers. I think we're going to see, hopefully, a better one for Mercedes. But if I was a betting man, and like my producer is, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be placing bets on them. I just don't know. As George Russell said, he said in the pre-racing, how would you get on the podium? He said, I need 2 or 3 cars to crash. Well, his wish came true. I just don't think it will again this weekend. Red Bull. Max will obviously pull something out and get close to the front, but I don't think he's going to be in the hunt against McLaren. And for Sergio Perez, that clipping wings on analogy, we've got Mexico coming up as well in the near future, and I think that's when we're going to see him do his next glorious flyby and get to the front. So we might have to wait till that. Anyway, I'm excited to see this circus roll on to the streets of Singapore. I hope you are too. Well, thank you so much to David Coulthard for joining us. It's always so great. And obviously to Mobil1 for the love of driving. Thank you for your support. And to The Wynn for having us as always. Don't forget to follow along on social media. There's so much happening in between these races and so much to talk about. I'll see you next week, guys. Take care.